Isotheists-Prologue. Date: 52nd year of freedom. The following text is about the spiritual revolution which reshaped humanity. Isotheism. For much of human history, the collective belief of humankind was that gods commanded the universe. Sun deities, animal worship, and various other pagan belief systems sprouted from the imaginations of the ancient mind to rationalize the universe. The mysteries of birth and death, storm and sun, fire and flood could not be explained with ancient science. For every unknown question, an act of the gods was the reply. Hoping to influence the outcome of these mysteries, ancient tribes began to worship and pay tribute to their gods. Thus, the rule of religion ascended, master to humankind. Polytheism, the belief in many gods, began to fall out of trend as civilizations grew larger. The fierce rulers of these complex empire cities observed the power-harnessing attributes of idol worship to strengthen their command. The ancient multi-god myths of yesteryear were soon forgotten, and a world dominated by monotheistic thought ruled humanity for 2,000 years. That was until he came. It was the great human liberator, Contrao Messio, who challenged the previously assumed truths that God and his chosen idols were masters of the human race. Messio let it be known that humankind had falsely installed itself as servant to God, and that our fear and awe of nature was incorrectly managed via worship. He opened the door to the belief that God and humankind are of the same cosmic dust. Perhaps most simply summed up by the words of Contrao Messio himself, God and man are equal. This idea, along with other isotheist philosophies, were perceived as blasphemous by most citizens of the world at the time. The thought innovations put forth by Messio and the isotheists quickly gained momentum and began to topple the ancient towers of religion, redefine faith, and reframe the human experience and its role within the universe. Like most spiritual revolutionaries, Contrao Messio and his mentor, John Concio, were framed as enemies of the state. In the dark hours following Messio's trial, many central to the isotheist movement fled the United States, fearing false accusations of terror-anarchist charges. They escaped to the jungles of Central America, fishing villages of Asia, and various other remote and distant corners of the globe. A few within Messio's inner circle remained in America and were forced to live in the shadows of society. They squatted in abandoned homes, lived under alias names, and transacted in cash to eliminate any potential paper trail. They lived on the run in order to elude the prying eyes of their predators, government intelligence agencies. They became known as the underground isotheist movement. Meanwhile, the overground movement, the non-organizers who lived by the words of Messio, practiced their beliefs in secrecy. Isotheist communities sprouted up in close-knit urban neighborhoods, small rural towns, and social circles. The overground lived and worked among the non-believers, hiding their beliefs out of fear of being discovered. Yet, in candlelit basements, dark corners of coffee shops and taverns, and isolated locations in nature, they would gather and speak freely. And thus the harvest seeds of the words of Messiah blew across the world, permeating minds far and wide. While the isotheist fire blazed around the world, the gore of the war on state reached into the life of every citizen of the globe. The United Anarchists, the UA's, constant barrage of small yet strategic bombings not only caused global chaos, but also raised awareness of an emerging thought paradigm: the end of the nation-state. Many minds worldwide began to realize that the detriments of the nation-state far outweighed the benefits. End the nation-state, end the war, and war is an act of the state, not the people, became common expressions of the anti-war movement of the time. Elitist think tank policy circles and radical political groups buzzed with the idea of end of state, captivating intellectuals and thought leaders worldwide. As governments found themselves allocating ever larger proportions of their budgets toward the war on state, the quality of services by the state began to suffer. Police forces were overwhelmed with the constant anarchist attacks. Senior citizens' ghettos formed as public pensions defaulted on their promised payments. At first, the jobless, hungry, and disenfranchised demonstrated and petitioned their governments, but the sharp ideological politics and systematic gridlock blocked any path for change. Citizens revolted. "Starve the fat man" became the expression of angered citizens who stopped paying taxes as a revolt against the tyrant state. Many of these tax revolutionaries fled the developed nations and joined changees colonies across the undeveloped world. They shunned the statesters, those who submitted to the rule of government and its unbridled grasp on liberty. It was in these refugee colonies, formed to avoid the tyranny of the nation-state, where many isotheists found a home. Whilst the isotheist movement liberated the souls of millions, many of the ancient order were terrified. The mass numbers of conversions from Christianity, Islam, and other faiths to isotheism caused a backlash. Many zealots of the Abrahamic faiths fiercely challenged the beliefs of Contral Messio and portrayed the movement as a terror-anarchist organization. Religious leaders and the intelligence community found a common enemy in the isotheist movement, and instigated a worldwide witch hunt of those associated with the words of Messio. Constant surveillance, unjustified arrests, and violent attacks were just a few of the forms of persecution the isotheists were forced to endure. Millions were beaten and arrested, thousands incarcerated, and some were murdered for their beliefs. Online video speeches of Messio were highly monitored by the intelligence agencies, while bootleg hard copies were confiscated and burned en masse. Intelligence agencies set up dedicated divisions within their bureaucracies to track and investigate isotheist activity. Yet the persecutors failed to realize that their egregious actions merely added fuel to the fire of those inspired by Contral Messio. As the movement developed, varying factions of isotheist thought began to emerge. The colonies in Central and South America, the United States, Eastern Asia, and other dispersed pockets of Messian thought formed varying interpretations of the words of Messiah. As leaders of the various isotheist syndicates were either arrested or in hiding, communication between disparate isotheist groups suffered. The lack of centralized leadership and the inability to build consensus around the interpretation of Messiah's words resulted in conflict between the syndicates. This friction intensified over the years. Before long, neophyte isotheist sects began to form based on radical interpretations of the acts and life of Contral Messio. Some tales spoke of miracles and supernatural feats. The great human liberator could fly and cure terminal diseases with the touch of his finger. Many long-established sects branded the neophytes as blasphemous to the isotheist cause, while others opportunistically utilized the flood of new converts to power their own agendas. Soon, an ideological civil war raged among the varying sects of Messian thought. Some factions rejected the Christian converts and perceived the church as the enemy, while others welcomed all who embraced Messio's words. The clash of the isotheists spun out of control as the leaders of various sects competed for influence over the movement. The fight eventually led to the most horrific event in isotheist history: Red Tuesday. In an attempt to stop the spread of a false brand of Messian thought, the anonymous authors compiled a collection of documents and uploaded these files for the world to read. Sekvonta Testamento, the life and teachings of the great human liberator, was uploaded and secretly distributed among the growing isotheist population in the 52nd year of freedom. The collection, although perceived as terror-anarchist propaganda by the intelligence community, was immensely popular. Despite the fact that the full text was only available on public domains for less than 7 hours, nearly 2 million downloads took place during that time. Hundreds of thousands of copies were discovered on hard drives, in print, handwritten, and on rogue servers across the world in multiple languages. Legions of intelligence agencies attempted to contain the spread of these documents, but it was far too late. Its distribution had become viral. Demand for isotheist law was so great that stories about the lives of Messio's disciples began to emerge. These tales focused on the turmoil among the leadership of the isotheist movement and the enormous struggles the isotheists endured to keep the words of Messio alive. Unfortunately, the verified source documents were diluted with falsified stories by the neophyte isotheist sects. These fabrications and myths intended to rebrand the isotheist movement as a supernatural, fear-mongering cult that promoted violence as a call to action, the polar opposite of Messio's intentions. The anonymous authors have worked tirelessly to refute these lies and promote the integrity of Contral Messio's philosophy with this collection, verified source documents of which are contained in this upload. They write in the name of the one they fight for, Contral Messio. To the brave souls who sacrificed their blood, sweat, tears, and lives in order to assemble these documents you are about to read. Energy among us. This document was uploaded on December the 31st at midnight in the 52nd year of freedom.